Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us live on the ABC 15 Facebook page, where we are talking about how Arizona felons can restore both their voter and gun rights. So thanks for joining us. We do have two experts, lawyers in town here in the Phoenix area. First, Chris Califano, and then Julie Gunnicle. So we really appreciate you joining us, who are experts on this topic. We should say at the outset here that they're able to provide us a general framework of the process of civil rights and gun rights restoration and talk a little bit about the existing Arizona statutes that govern this. However, they will not be able to provide individual legal advice. If you do need legal advice, they advise you to seek out your own attorney. So let's jump right into this. First of all, let's talk about after someone has been convicted of a felony and served their time, there is a process where they can restore kind of a multi-pronged process. One of the things they can do is file to restore their civil rights, and those apply to voting rights as well as being able to serve on a jury and run for public office. There's also where you can apply to get your gun rights back. But let's start with the civil rights process, because it's different depending on how many felonies you've committed, right, Julie?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And Arizona has made moves to make this easier for folks. So one of the new rules that everybody should be aware of is that if a person has a single felony conviction in their past and that it originates here in Arizona, and if they have finished their final discharge from probation or DOC, and that they've paid their fines and restitution, in theory, their civil rights have been restored and they can re-register to vote. Now, it gets more complicated when you add on additional felony convictions, and it gets even more complicated than that when we're talking about potentially expungable offenses that could be set aside, or gun rights as well.
Okay. Chris, do you want to launch in a little bit on if you have committed multiple felonies, not just first-time offender, single felony, but multiple felonies? What process do you have to start to do in order to try to get your rights back?
If there are more than one felony convictions, even if it's from the same case, then the process is more cumbersome, just as Julie pointed out. And it's best, if you can, to seek out a lawyer to get specific advice about your specific situation, because everyone's situation is a little bit different, and those differences can be important. But to speak broadly, it's about asking a judge through a written motion to reinstate either your civil rights or your gun rights. Usually those are two separate requests, which can be part of the same application, and or asking the judge to set aside a conviction, which is effectively undoing the conviction or finding of guilt.
So let me say this. In order to get the form, the application to fill out, you should seek out the Superior Court in the county in which you were convicted, right?
Well, the answer is yes, if it's a felony. If it's for other things that can affect your rights, you would go to the same courthouse that you were convicted of. And this is part of the reason why it can get complicated. If you've got a case in Maricopa County Superior Court, then to reinstate the rights from that case, you would have to ask and use the forms for that court. If you had one in Pima County, you would have to ask for the one in Pima County. If you got both, then you need one for each court.
That's exactly right. And I think it's also really important to note, at least restoration of your rights to vote are applicable to folks who have a federal felony as well. And in those cases, you apply in the county in which you reside to that superior state court.
Okay. And right now we already have a question from a viewer, and please submit your questions online, from Sandy Gehring. She wants to know, how do you find out if your rights were actually reinstated? So after you filed the form, how do you find out if they're reinstated?
Sure. I mean, that should be as easy as a judge making a ruling. So if you fill out this form, so I've got the paper application for the Superior Court in Maricopa County right here. And once it's submitted, you're looking at somewhere between 3 and 6 months to have the process finalized. But the court will contact you when it's granted. If it is not granted, A new law that was passed just 2 years ago requires the judge to give the reasons why it wasn't granted, and that court should be contacting you. If you're one of those folks who fall into the automatically restored category, that's only one single felony conviction area, there are still groups that are advising people to file this form to confirm that they have been had their rights restored, because the systems don't always talk to each other across the police to courts to county recorder lines.
Okay, thanks, Julie. Let me turn to Chris and ask you a little bit about gun rights restoration, because you use the same form to apply for gun rights restoration, but some of the rules are a little different on who might qualify for that, right?
Absolutely. And I was going to jump in and just say this was a perfect question. Yes, everything that Julie said, I think, is accurate. But when there's a big distinction when we're talking about civil rights and gun rights, and the gun rights are affected by a felony conviction. If you've been convicted of a felony conviction or a misdemeanor domestic violence offense, most domestic violence offenses, but certainly not all domestic violence offenses, your gun rights have been taken away. And to reinstate them requires that you ask the judge from the courthouse in which you were convicted to reinstate your gun rights. It's important, unlike the voting rights that we've talked about, that if you believe your rights have been reinstated, before you go possess or transfer or buy a gun or do anything with a firearm, that you contact the Department of Public Safety or the FTA, or preferably both, and confirm that you're validly allowed to possess a firearm before you go out and possess it, because the consequences of being a prohibited possessor and possessing a firearm are significant.
Right. And also we should say that there is no automatic restoration of gun rights if you convicted a felony in Arizona, correct?
That's right.
So let me ask you this. You discussed the gun thing and how to make sure that your gun rights are restored before you actually possess a gun. Also, if you do want your civil rights restored, you have to wait until you get that final order from the court before you even register to vote, correct?
That is absolutely right.
And what is the penalty if you were to say register to vote if your rights had not been restored?
Yeah, that's a potential class 6 felony. And depending on how it's done, it could be even raised from there. So it is vital that you do this right. And I think that's one of the things that your stories really shined a light on, that even people who enter this realm hoping to restore people's right to vote, which is a noble cause, 4.3% of Arizonans do not have their right to vote back as a result of a criminal conviction. And it's incredibly important to have access to these resources. But unless you have the expertise and in particular the access to an attorney, there's some very big traps for the unwary that could criminalize people even further. And the stakes are real and they are
high. We did have a question about if you could reinstate your rights if you've moved out of state, from Shauna Squires. We can pull that question up. Is it the same process? You literally have to come back to the Arizona court where you were convicted, right?
And incidentally, the inverse is also true. If you're looking to reinstate your rights from a conviction that originates in another state, it is that other state who you need to work through their process for reinstatement, even though you currently reside here in Arizona.
And is there any kind of phase out date? Marty was asking if it was 40 years ago in another state, do you need to contact that state?
Yes.
Okay. Well, that was a good question.
Yeah. Arizona has no provision of the law that allows for someone's criminal record or gun rights or anything just to automatically come back or be erased, the conviction be erased due to the passage of time. So that's a frequent question, and whether I think the law should be different doesn't matter. The answer is no.
Well, one of our questions had to do with, do you actually have to go down to the courthouse or can you do it online? From the people we've talked to at the court, you can either call the Superior Court where you were convicted. You can check their website online. Often the forms are online, and each application form has a specific discussion of how to properly file And there's no filing fee for this though. So it's
That's
free.
exactly right. It is free. All it takes is a little bit of your time. And this is something that in theory one could do oneself. You'd have to pay extreme attention to the details. There are self-help packets available in nearly every county and jurisdiction. This is also one of those instances where you could seek the help of someone else at a clinic for free. So in Maricopa County, once a quarter, there is a rights restoration that is run from the county. That being said, I know that a lot of folks distrust the governmental entity that, criminalized them and penalized them in the first place. So one could also turn to a myriad of different community organizations that are doing this kind of work. In particular, I know of the Real Change PAC in our more rural areas that are doing these sorts of clinics. The ACLU periodically does them. I've seen Mass Liberation do them. I've seen the Arizona Advocacy Foundation run them nearly monthly. So there are opportunities where if you needed that one-on-one advice and wanted to speak to a true expert and get that tailored advice to you and your situation, that's out there and is also available for free.
Okay. I wanted to turn the discussion a little bit to what we've been talking about right now is a rights restoration process, right? That does not erase your conviction, does not expunge it, does not set aside it. But there are some ways that even on this very same form where you ask for rights restoration, you can ask for a set aside. Can you explain what a set aside is versus an expungement? And is there any circumstance where you can get an expungement in Arizona?
So a set aside is different than an expungement. An expungement is equivalent to erasing the criminal conviction or sealing it so that way it can't be viewed by a public records check or other check. A set aside is undoing that guilty finding, that conviction, and it will show as either set aside or dismissed or something similar. And so it looks cleaner than the existing conviction, but it is not clearing and sealing or expungement or similar phrasing. So you can set aside most convictions, especially misdemeanors, but most felonies you can set aside. Not all of them, but most of them you can. What's important is, and certainly most misdemeanors, but the process is different, and there are expungements available for things like marijuana possession crimes and related offenses. Not all offenses like that, but some. But that's a different process than a set aside, and also unless you can clear and seal records when someone's been wrongfully charged or convicted, but that's not most circumstances. Most circumstances are somebody who has a conviction and they want to clean up their record.
That's exactly right. Do you mind if I jump in there on the expungement piece too? Because this is one thing that is, I think, a hidden gem that was in 207. So when voters passed Proposition 207, which gave us adult use of marijuana here in our state, they also passed what I believe to be a gold standard in expungement. It is a true sealing of someone's criminal record that makes it so that that person and their attorney are the only people that can ever tell that that conviction ever happened ever again. Now, that being said, Chris is exactly right. It's so narrow who is eligible, but there's somewhere in the realm of 250,000 folks in Arizona who, if you have a conviction for the possession, consumption, or manufacture of 2.5 ounces of less of flower of marijuana or 12.5 grams of concentrate, if you have a paraphernalia conviction, or if you have a cultivation conviction for 6 or fewer plants, you're eligible for this program. And it is, as I said, a true clearing. It is the only real expungement that, appreciably the only real expungement that's eligible, apart from findings of actual innocence and a really narrow category of juvenile offenses. But if you're eligible for it, that form also has a restoration of rights aspect to it. So those two processes are tied together. So if you're not eligible to vote because of a felony cannabis conviction, an expungement could help.
Thanks, Julie. I just want to reset here really quickly. I'm Melissa Blasius, an investigative reporter here at ABC 15. What you are watching is a live town hall with 2 lawyers here in the Valley, and we are talking about how Arizona felons can restore their voter and gun rights. This issue came up in some of our reporting this week as we were talking to dozens of felons who all met with the same politician in South Phoenix, who believed that they were getting civil rights restoration, which is a court process. But in the end, they found that they were solely registered to vote without that restoration, which is illegal under Arizona law. So we are trying to help people understand what the actual process is, how to do it right, in order for people to move ahead, whether or not they've had a felony conviction in their past and they're just curious, or if they have questions on whether or not what happened to them was done correctly. So let's turn a little bit more to some questions here from our viewers. Shelly Barajas is asking us, how long do you have to wait to get your rights back? So let's start with Julie Gunnicle on that. And can you explain the difference between a first-time felon and somebody who has multiple felonies?
Sure. And I think this is the biggest area of like misunderstanding and miscommunication. So first, speaking directly to folks who might have only one felony conviction in their past. Now, that doesn't mean one felony case. It means a single felony conviction. And in the instance that someone has a single felony conviction, their rights are automatically restored, their voting rights, upon the completion of the term of probation, or the absolute discharge of imprisonment from the Department of Corrections, provided that all restitutions and fines are paid. Now, that being said, it is still the advice of a major advocacy organization in town that because these different systems don't always talk to each other in a congruent way, that even in that instance where your rights are restored automatically, it's still to your benefit to file this. This is in the forms in Maricopa County. If you have a conviction originating here, it's somewhere between depending on how you want to do it, a 1-page to a 5-page application. The process takes between 3 to 6 months. It is absolutely free, but that would be a way to confirm that your rights have been restored. And then if you are someone who has more than one previous felony conviction in their past, this is absolutely the only way to get those rights restored in a way that's quick. I suppose there's also the ability to get a pardon. But this is what I would be advising if someone needs to get their rights restored and wants to do it ahead of the next election cycle.
Right. Okay. Well, Chris, go ahead.
We intimated about this earlier, but I think it's important just to paint with broad strokes. If you don't know whether your rights are reinstated, you should go talk to a legal professional, review the court records and minute entries to see what orders exist. And don't guess at it, be sure, because there are major consequences for registering to vote or voting when it's unlawful to do so.
And especially for possessing a gun, because we should say if your rights are automatically restored for those first-time felons, if they just complete some things on their own, their gun rights still are not restored.
That's
unless you file the paperwork.
Absolutely right.
And get a judge's approval ordering that your rights be restored.
Right, and that's that process varies in how long it takes. Each court's a little bit different, but I would expect on the short end, from the time the paperwork's filed, to be 90 to 120 days on the short end for a felony case, and it could be longer than that.
And let me ask you this as well. Even if you apply to have your rights restored, there's no guarantee that the judge is going to sign off and make the order to restore them, correct?
That's right, save for that situation that Julie was mentioning where it's just one single felony conviction, because those voting rights should automatically be reinstated. But yes, that's not gun rights. And if you've got more, then the answer is yes, you would absolutely need to seek the relief from the judge and get that order from the judge before any registration or actual voting.
And with the gun rights restoration, it depends on, and I don't know if either Chris or Julie, you have these in front of you, but there's a longer waiting period before you're even able to be considered for gun rights restoration, depending on the kind of felony on your record, correct?
That's absolutely right. I'm sorry, Julie, were you going to say? I didn't mean to jump in.
Oh, I was going to chime in and be like, yes, it absolutely depends on the kind of offense and where it was committed. And yes, there are waiting periods.
Right. Some offenses can't be, you can never get your gun rights back. but other offenses you can. But certainly, when you're discharged from prison or probation, and how long you have to wait depends on the type of charge.
Okay. I want to turn now to another question, Chris and Julie. This is a person who has a fairly specific question, but basically, Matt Barrett is asking that he had a DUI and he's paid part but not all of his restitution or fines. Do you have to pay all of your restitution or fines before you can try to get your civil rights restored, or can you ask the judge to make an exception? Let's Chris.
I'll put it this way. I've never had a judge grant any relief when there's been any fines or restitution owed. And I would tell someone walking into my office, ready to hire me and pay me, that the money is useless unless and until they pay off the money that they owe the court. So I've never seen it happen. I don't think it's a good use of anyone's time to attempt it until they get financially up to speed with the court.
Let me ask you this question, because there's a lot of people who have moved to Arizona who may have a felony record in a different state. In order to get their civil rights or their gun rights back, what do they need to do to make sure that they are covered under Arizona law in getting their rights back to possess a gun or to vote? Julie?
Sure. I mean, you're not going to like this answer, but it would depend on what the law says in the state where the conviction originated. And the state laws are as diverse as our several states are as to when that happens and if that happens automatically. Now, one of the things that I would note is that Arizona is one of the most restrictive when it comes to restoring voting rights. So nearly every other state is going to have laws that make it a little bit easier on folks than ours, but you're going to have to go back to that state and find out what the law says and whether or not it's a state that, for example, automatically restores, or if you have to file a petition there in order to make that happen.
And just regarding gun rights, you would get the forms or seek the assistance of a lawyer or lawyers working for some of the firms that Ms. Gunnigal mentioned, and you would ask the judge in the court in which you were convicted to reinstate your gun rights. They'll never automatically have your gun rights reinstated.
And let me ask you this, and maybe this is a better question for Julie. You may have a better perspective on this. Why is Arizona so complicated when it comes to civil and gun rights restoration, where there are all of these different possibilities depending on the convictions that you've had in your past and waiting periods and the type of crime?
Wow. I mean, what a good question. I don't know that I have the answer, but I can tell you that has been, as a lifelong Arizonan who was born and raised here, that has been just what our criminal system is about. We are an overly criminalized state. We are the 4th largest incarcerator in the country, 8th largest in the world when it comes to our rate of folks we imprison. And we don't make it any easier to come out and join society either. There's all of these systemic hurdles in order to be able to rebuild one's life. And voting is just one small piece of those collateral consequences that come with a felony conviction. The one thing I would note is I'm seeing a sea change here in Arizona. I'm seeing that with the passage of 207, we're more accepting of giving folks second chances and erasing convictions. The numbers from before this era are striking. Between 2010 and 2015, a sum total of 31 people had their rights restored in our entire state over those 5 years. So to hear in your reporting, Melissa, that now we're up to 1,400 rights restorations applications being processed in a year is a good thing. And that's in part because of some of the reforms that we've seen, and in particular, the passage of HB 2080, which was 2 years ago.
Chris, thoughts on that? Is this overly complex where it makes it difficult for felons to figure out what the correct process is in order to get their gun rights and voting rights back?
I have a few thoughts. First, I wish it was simpler. I can't speak to how complicated it is in light of other states because I'm just not familiar with the law, those types of laws in other states. But what I can tell you is that I think it's more complicated than it should be. And I hope that the societal trend, especially in Arizona, continues moving in the direction of giving people who have changed their life and are ready to become valued members of society. We're ready to employ them and welcome them back to the community. And I think Arizonans would be surprised, as Ms. Gunnigal mentioned, given how many criminal charges there are in Maricopa County in Arizona, how many of your loved ones, your family and your friends have been in trouble, sometimes very minor and usually very minor offenses, but sometimes more significant than you might think.
Chris, let me ask you a quick one other question that hopefully is fairly easy to answer. If you are registered to vote and you are not sure if your civil rights have been restored, what should you do?
Consult a lawyer. That's what I would do first. Definitely don't try it on your own. If you can't afford a lawyer, there are organizations, voting registrations, ACLU. There are people who know how to find that information out. Another good quick thing to do is pull the minute entries from your case and see if there are any, most that's available through public access, and see if there's any orders there that shed light on it. And if there's confusion, talk to a lawyer, talk to voting agencies before you go out and vote.
I want to thank you very much for joining us. I want to be able to give each one of you a minute to make some final thoughts. First, Julie Gunnigal, what would you tell people first and foremost if they're interested in rights restoration?
Find a lawyer. Find an organization that can help you. Refuse to be a bystander in your democracy. The folks that are closest to the problem are closest to the solution, and your voice is needed. So if you are in a situation where you have a minor marijuana offense that needs to be expunged, visit the Expungement Coalition or visit Arizona Normal. We can help. If you need to restore your rights and it's a different sort of felony, there's only a million different orgs that are doing this work. Seek out the help of a professional who does this all day, every day, and get the help you need, because we need you. Democracy only works if we all vote.
And Chris Califano, thank you, Julie. Chris, what do you want to add?
Before you exercise your gun rights, talk to a lawyer and make sure you've got those rights. If you've ever been convicted of an offense or there's a valid order of protection or injunction against harassment against you, go talk to an attorney before you go possess a gun.
Well, I certainly want to thank both Julie Gunnigal and Chris Califano for talking to us today about this issue of civil rights restoration. Obviously, there's tens of thousands of Arizonans who do have felony convictions in the past who might be interested in this information and how to get started. Thank you very much for your time. We're also going to put in the comments section below here, we're going to put a couple of things. Our original story where we talked about how some people with felony convictions believe that they ended up illegally registered to vote. That's what started this whole discussion on our part. We're also going to put some information on about the process and how to go about starting to get your rights restored if you would like your civil rights restored or your gun rights restored in Arizona. And finally, we also have a form that we've gotten from the Maricopa County Recorder's Office. If you're in Maricopa County and you want to cancel your voter registration for any reason, that is also available, and we will put all of those in the comment section. Again, thank you very much, Julie and Chris, for joining us today and talking about this issue that affects so many Arizonans.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for having me.